A boring production will always result in a pretty boring mix, no matter how good the engineer is. You will give your mixer better material to work with if your tracks already have character. You can, instead of fighting the limitations, you can embrace them. So the more songs you finish, the faster you finish them, the more mistakes you make along the way, the faster you get better. And the core message here is safe typically equals boring. Bold typically equals exciting. At the end of the day, stop chasing perfection and start chasing vibe. There is no such thing as a perfect record. It's perfect when it serves the song perfectly and the message and what you want to get across.
This is the Self-Recording Band Podcast, the show where we help you make exciting records on your own, wherever you are, DIY style. Let's go.
So many home-recorded tracks sound lifeless, flat, and safe because artists are afraid to commit. The best records in history that we all love, however, were made by people taking risks at the source, bold risks, and not by playing it safe and fixing it later. So this whole concept and this whole topic matters because exciting records come from exciting choices, not endless options. This is what we want to talk about today. Hey, hello, my name is Benedict Hein. I'm the host of this show. I'm a mixing engineer. I run a studio called Outback Recordings and also a coaching platform called the Self-Recording Band, where we help artists from all over the world make exciting sounding records from their jam spaces and home studios. We do that through our personalized one-on-one coaching. And then we also have this free podcast and YouTube channel that you're watching or listening to right now. So welcome if you're new to the show. So good to have you. If you are already a listener coming back, thank you so much for listening again. We always appreciate you. Just so you know what I do day to day at my studio, I mix songs all day long. My team and I mix 200 to 300 songs every single year, and we've been doing that for the past 15 years. I used to be a full, I used to do full production, like a producer who does tracking, editing, producing, mixing, mastering, all that stuff. And then I transitioned into mixing only in the last couple of years, with the exception of a couple of full productions that I just do to keep my skills fresh and know what I'm talking about. But mostly I'm mixing these days. And the artists I'm mixing for are also from all over the world. And I'm mixing for both DIY independent artists and also labels with bigger projects. So yeah, I like to think I know what I'm talking about, and all the stuff that I've learned from doing all of that over the years, I'm sharing on this platform and through our coaching, so you don't have to make the same mistakes that I made in the beginning or the same mistakes that many of the artists made that we worked with. So all the lessons, insights, and everything we share here. So back to today's topic. Let's start with talking about the safe approach versus the bold approach. The safe approach is what most DIY artists do. They record clean, flat DI tracks, for example, when they track guitars and bass. They use a fix-it-in-the-mix kind of mindset, and they avoid committing to tones or arrangements early in the process. That's what a lot of people do. Because they don't really know what they're doing and they're not intentional, and I totally understand that. They just record safe tracks, safe recordings, and then they worry about the sound in the mixing process, where they can undo everything and redo everything countless times. And they always give themselves the option to go back and iterate. And I totally get that. That's the safe approach. The bold approach is what great producers do, is commit to sounds during tracking, make production decisions, production choices that shape the vibe of the record. And I mean production choices, not just mixing choices. I get to the difference between those things later. And they embrace creative risks, even if it's something is not perfect necessarily, it's unique and memorable. So they embrace the fact that not everything's perfect, but it's more important that it's unique, exciting, interesting, memorable. That's what great producers do. So that is the difference, right? Why does that matter? Because good producers could also just keep everything safe and then do all the decisions later and all those things. So why does it matter to just do it and not give yourself all the options all the time? Well, records, more than anything, need personality, vibe, identity, authenticity. And art, by definition, I think, is not safe. It is a creative expression. It is not something that you just do a certain way based on certain rules, or it's not something where you play it safe. It's about taking risks, about pushing boundaries, about doing provocative stuff, about, you want to create some sort of emotional reaction to the art. So records need to be the perfect representation of whatever the artist is trying to say and do, and it needs to be authentic. It needs to have a vibe, personality, and identity more than anything. That's much more important than perfection. Now, a boring production will always result in a pretty boring mix, no matter how good the engineer is. And that is because if you don't make decisions and then you make the decisions later, you will have to, how do I say this? You can do all things in the mix, of course, and you can turn the mixing into the production phase more or less. But if you don't make intentional decisions as you're building your arrangement, especially if you're on your own and you're not tracking a live band, then you don't have the effect that happens when you make one decision and then the next one is based on what you did last, and then the next one is based on what you have now, and so on and so forth. So you're recording everything in a kind of a vacuum as if it were isolated tracks, and then trying to put them together later is going to give you challenges, whereas making bold decisions forces you to think about how you're going to do the next thing, and then how you're going to do the next thing, and you're going to do different things compared to having a bunch of flat blank tracks where you have all the options. You're going to do different things. It forces you to think differently about it and to do bolder, more creative things. But I'll get to that and explain it better. Just know that a boring production almost always leads to a pretty boring mix. And it doesn't really matter how good the engineer is. It's just limited by the fact that you're not forced to think outside of the box, basically. Committing early, however, gives you a faster workflow. So you just move on and never look back, basically, and you don't have to do certain things later and over again. You just do it as you do it, and then it's done. The faster workflow, it gives you clear direction in mixing, so you can stay you lose objectivity over time. The longer you spend on a project, the less objective you are. And so if you don't have a clear direction already when you start the mix, you're going to have to spend a lot of time getting things in the right direction, thinking about which direction you actually want to go in, and you're going to spend a lot of time with the song where you just lose perspective more and more and you get closer and closer to the song. Whereas moving fast and committing, if you do that and you start the mixing process, you'll already have captured tones that just are what they are. They work. They have there's a clear direction. The rough mix already tells you where things are going, and so you don't have to spend as much time mixing. You can make use of the objectivity. You don't lose perspective. You don't get as close, and you don't have to think about where you want to take this. The tracks tell you where you should take them. The vibe is already there, so you have a clear direction in mixing. And it builds confidence and momentum. It just feels very good that once you completed a step of the production process, you're one step closer to the final thing. And then you do the next thing and you're one step closer, and it just feels great. It feels like you're making progress. It builds confidence. It's fun. And if you don't do it, there's always this something in the back of your mind where I got to get to this later, and I still got to do this or that. And this is just a rough version, and I know later it will sound great. And this whole approach and this whole mindset of, at some point, once I mix it, it will sound great, it's just not a very fun and confident way of working. Whereas, oh yeah, this sounds awesome, let's do the next thing. Oh, it sounds even better. Oh shit, this is sounding like the thing I had in mind. If everything you do makes you think that's a much more fun way, a much more confident way of making a record. And it will help the end result, no doubt. And it will make you want to make more music because it's fun. And you're feeling more and more confident the more you do it. So there's that, confidence and momentum. If you're outsourcing the mixing process, so let's say you're self-producing, self-recording, but you don't mix yourself, which is a lot of DIY artists, right? Then you will give your mixer better material to work with, if your tracks already have character. General vibe and character are production decisions, not mixing decisions. So if you record a bunch of safe tracks and countless options and you don't make any creative decisions so that thinking that then your mixer will have all the options and the result will be better, what actually happens is that you are not producing. You make the mixer produce the song, and it could go in all kinds of directions. So first of all, it could mean that the mix you get back will not at all be what you wanted because the mixer has different taste, interprets things differently, and will turn your recordings into his version of the production. And you might or might not want that. And also, then the other thing is the mixer, if he or she doesn't know what you're going for, then they are going to have a hard time mixing because they have to kind of guess what you might want, and they have to, like I said, spend so much time thinking about which direction this is going in, versus if you give them the character and the vibe already and they open up the session or they import the tracks and they hit play and it's clear to them what you're trying to do, they can just take it to the next level, enhance it, and give you back something that sounds better than what you've done, but still has your vibe and your personality in it. So you need to make production decisions. That's part of recording and production of being a producer, which is what most self-recording bands are. And then the mixer's job is to mix, not to produce, unless your agreement is differently and you specifically said, hey, we don't know where to take this. We don't want to produce it. You tell us what to do. But then it's better to have the mixer, to involve the mixer in the production process and the recording already, and not save these decisions for the mix later. So then you need to collaborate with someone who helps you produce the song before you send it off to mixing. Now, how to actually be bold? Like, what does that all mean? Especially in a home studio where you have like limited gear. You know, I hear you, like you could say, well, that's all nice and great. If I had a big studio with all this fancy gear, I could make bold decisions. I could commit EQ and compression and all these things. But all I have is a mic and an interface, and the DI for the guitar is like, how can I be bold when I record? Here's how. First of all, if you record anything with a mic, the mic placement matters, and you can get really creative with that. Like, mic placement is a creative tool. It's not just that you put a mic in front of something and record it. Where you put it, how you position it, which mic you choose, and all of that, these are very much creative decisions. So I'm going to give you a few practical ideas that you can apply right away. You can move mics into hallways, let's say, to capture an exciting sound of a room, a bigger recording space. You know, even if you have a small recording room or jam space, maybe you can open the door, put a mic in the hallway, set another one up close and blend the two, you know, or whatever. Like, you can capture interesting spaces that you have. And even if you don't have that opportunity, if you don't have that option of opening the door and miking a hallway, maybe you can find a cool spot inside of your room. You can put a mic in a closet. You can put a mic in a corner underneath the sofa, inside of a weird box. You can, whatever. Like, there's countless creative things where you can put a mic in a weird spot and capture something unique that gives a cool character to what you're recording. It doesn't have to be the only mic. You can always use a close, dry mic, but you can have something else that you can then blend with that to add a unique character and make use of the room you have. So that is one thing. Bathrooms, hallways, staircases, like whatever you have. You can, in general, I think you should always capture the room vibe, not just sterile close mics. In most cases in modern music, you need close mics, but make use of the unique space you have, because that's going to be a differentiator by itself. Like, the fact that it is your room and nobody else has the same room makes your recording sound unique. So if you eliminate all of the room, which you would on a close mic typically, because most rooms, if they're not like well-designed recording rooms, they don't sound really good. So you want to eliminate the room on the close mic, but you can still capture it with all its flaws and imperfections on a separate mic that you can then blend with it and add the character of your space. And then it's not a mistake, it's a flavor you can add. And you can make use of a unique situation that only you have, and no other record will ever sound like that. So that's great. And there's always ways to make a bad room work in some way. You can EQ it, you can filter it, you can distort it, you can compress it, you can whatever. It's just about adding that little bit of extra flavor that you have available in your room. And I've been in many, many rooms, and I've always found some interesting corner or space, whatever, that I could use to blend in. So capture the room vibe in some way, shape, or form. Most important on drums, can be really cool on guitars. Bass, maybe not so much. Bass is one of those things where usually you want that dry thing, but that doesn't mean you can't try it. Vocals, definitely have an isolated dry vocal because you're going to run into all kinds of issues if you don't with most music. But you can still set up a vibe mic somewhere and also capture the room along with the vocal and have it on 2 separate tracks. Nothing wrong with that. Can work great. Can work great. Now, the next thing is you can do weird things with the mics that you record, even if you don't have access to fancy gear. You can maybe buy a really, really cheap, crappy mic. The cheapest Chinese mic you find on Amazon, or a secondhand, whatever mic you find somewhere, like whatever it is, like the crappiest mic you can find, maybe a couple of them. Just buy them for fun and just try and use them and see if there's anything weird, exciting, unique about it that you can blend in or use on a certain source. So you don't always have to have the high quality gear. You can make a lo-fi recording with a really crappy microphone, or you can blend a second crappy mic with your good one. You can distort and overdrive mics. You can turn up the preamp on the interface so much that it just always clips intentionally on that crappy mic, and then you have a distorted, fuzzy, lo-fi thing that you can blend in with your pristine, dry, direct recording of the good mic, You can use headphones as microphones. If you plug the headphone jack into a DI box and then that into a mic preamp, you can use any set of headphones or earbuds as microphones, because speakers are just mics in reverse. And so that pair of headphones, any cheap earbuds pair with a cable can be plugged into the iBox and then into your interface, and you have a weird mic that you can put somewhere in the room. Very funny thing to do. You can mic your guitar caps with that and blend it in. You can use it as drum room mics. So that is a thing. You can plug your mics into guitar pedal and then into the interface. You can, like, whatever weird device you have, you cannot break things usually, and you can just plug things into things and see what it sounds like and come up with cool creative ideas, even with very, very cheap gear or limited resources. Just play around with that stuff and have fun. Then creative recording techniques. So not just mic placements and cool things you can do with mic, but general creative recording techniques. You can record things and then reamp them through interesting things. So that means you record a track like you usually would, and then you have your safe recording. And then you can take that right away, run it out of a line output of your interface if you have additional line outs. On many small interfaces, you will only have the speaker outs, but if you have a bigger interface with additional line outs, you can use one of them, send the recorded signal out of the interface through an available line output, and then you just run that through a small speaker, a practice amp, an old tube radio. Like there's one like next to me there, right? You see that, like that there? If you're watching on YouTube, there is, maybe you have one of those. Maybe you have like whatever thing that has a line input and is interesting or crappy. Just run the thing you just recorded through that, put a mic in front of it and re-record it. You can send it out through a speaker into a room, record the room, and then like record it back in and then blend it. So you can reamp rooms if you want. I've done that with drums a couple of times when I only have access to a dry jam space. I would record drums and then send the recording of the drums, maybe only the overheads, maybe only the close mics, whatever I want, maybe only kick and snare, maybe snare and toms. I will run that through a speaker after recording into a big room. I can take it wherever I want to, run it into a big room, set up a pair of mics, and then record that as my room mics, and then blend it in and like import it in the session. And all of a sudden, I have a room mic pair that wasn't there when I recorded the drums. You can layer multiple quote unquote wrong takes for texture. So you could have your one perfect take, and then you can detune the instrument slightly and record a couple of layers slightly tuned up or down and create a weird flanging, phasing, slightly detuned effect around the perfectly tuned main take, which adds a nice texture and is different from applying an effect. You can record a bunch of vocal layers, like doubles of the same thing, and then you can take the doubles and slightly detune them, distort them, make something wrong about them and blend them in for some interesting texture, like just in a subtle way. You can delay something slightly or play it a little later and then add that as a kind of a natural slapback echo thing that can sound cool. There's so many possibilities by just manipulating additional layers of the same performance and doing it right away while you produce, because again, what you're recording right now will will impact whatever the next thing is that you're recording. So don't do these things in the mix only. Do it while you're producing. You can double track vocals in different rooms for contrast, or any instrument. So you could do the main take in your vocal booth or the corner of the room that you've treated, or your jam space, wherever you record vocals. And then you can take the mic, go to the bathroom, record a pair of vocals there, of doubles. Then you go out to the hallway, record a pair of doubles there. Then you can move into a corner, you can crawl underneath the desk or whatever. Wherever it sounds weird, you can lock yourself in the closet, or I don't know, and record different doubles in different spaces and then blend them. Same is true for guitar amps. You could, play a double and put the amp in a weird spot for the double, or reamp it in whatever, like all kinds of things. Then there are arrangement choices. So you can change, so these were the recording techniques where you can make bold decisions, but you can also make bold arrangement choices. You can change the instrumentation mid-song in a surprising way. You can flip, you can turn off the guitars, and then instead there comes a distorted piano for a bridge or something. The distorted piano replaces your distorted guitars for a moment. It's going to be a very interesting moment that definitely catches people's attention. You can move from clean to distorted guitars and vice versa. You can remove you can drop out instruments completely. You can make sudden changes in volume, create dynamics from part to part by doing that. You can add layers only in certain parts. So you might have a normal bass track, and then in the chorus you add a programmed sub-synth bass doing the same line. All of a sudden you have more weight in the chorus. You can filter instruments, make them more lo-fi in a chorus, and then full spectrum in the verses, and then full spectrum in the chorus again. You can record one guitar for the verse, mono up the middle behind the vocal, and then when the chorus comes in, you do a double, and you have wide stereo guitars. There's countless options you can do with arrangements where you can be bold. You can add unconventional sounds to your arrangement, like you can record your own hand claps, any kind of noises you can make with your body or hitting things. You can make your own percussion sounds by just doing that, You can use field recordings. You can record noise out on the streets. You can, any kind of noise, any kind of thing you can record on your phone as you walk around, you can turn that into a percussive element. You can get really creative there. There's all kinds of sounds around us all day, and some of those might remind you of a hi-hat, others might remind you of a clap or a snare, or some might be a low frequency, and you can layer them with a kick drum, or you can record your own sounds that only you have access to, and then you can layer them in the session, or you can cut them to like individual wave file samples and then trigger them, fire them with a sampler. Endless options there. So yeah, it's really, really cool. You can create your own kick drum sound by, hitting your chest and then hitting the table with something that makes a clicking sound, and then blending the two into one sample. You have the body and the bass by doing that, and then the click by doing hitting the table or doing a clap. Endless, like I said, endless options there. You can use ambient noise things as kind of a pad in the background to fill up things, Yeah. Then you can embrace your limitations with weird and cheap gear. So let's say maybe your kids have a toy keyboard, or you have like cassette recorders or cheap guitar pedals, karaoke machines, whatever you have. You can use that stuff to record things through or with. You can even further distort those things. You can use noise, distortion, or artifacts as character, like things that you consider flaws. You can turn them into the highlight of a part. You can use them intentionally to add character. So you can actually, instead of fighting the limitations, you can embrace it. If you don't have pristine recording gear and your gear always sounds a little noisy and like not high resolution, maybe don't aim to make a high-resolution, hi-fi record. Maybe make something lo-fi intentionally, because that's what your gear does anyways, and you filter it and distort it even more, and that's your vibe. And if you don't want that, you maybe need to upgrade the gear. But you can, instead of fighting the limitations, you can embrace them. Then the location and environment is a big one. So you can record outside. You can record in a garage. You can record things in a basement. You can go to a church hall. You can go to whatever place you have access to. Get a little mobile recording rig, or record certain tracks on your phone. There are microphones or ways to connect your interface with the phone. You can take a laptop with you. You can do simple things, not the entire arrangement maybe or the entire band, but maybe simple single elements that we record in a real place, and then take it back to your home studio so you don't have to sit around in your cave all day. You can go outside and capture things in interesting environments. And that way you can capture a natural, ambience that plugins can't replicate. That's the whole idea. You want something that only you can do, that you came up with, that serves the song, and that's not a preset that everyone else uses. And the whole point of all of this is not to be weird on principle or just because. It's to have... You want to have a clear vision and direction first, of course, and then you want to find creative ways to get there. So if you have in mind a dirty, distorted record, instead of using the same plugin or the decapitator or whatever everybody else uses to distort things, try your way of distorting things. If you're going for a very ambient, wide, wet kind of sound with lots of reverb, instead of using the same reverb plugins or just any reverb plugin, find a big ambient hall, church, whatever, and record stuff there, and then use that as your vibe. That's what I'm talking about. So it's about doing whatever serves the song, but in a way that is unique to your record, and that is inspiring, and that also it teaches you something. If you do that every single time you do that, you'll learn something for sure. And finally, it's not everything is lo-fi and weird spots and all that, right? Sometimes we just want to make a pristine, clear sounding record, and that's all we want. So then if you feel like you're limited and you can't do things like commit EQ, commit compression, have a very high quality recording chain where you can make bold decisions in a high quality way, remember that you can rent things. You don't have to own these things. So, like a weekend with one great microphone or a special piece of gear like a really good compressor can transform your record. If you rent a really great vintage tube mic and an 1176 compressor and a nice preamp and maybe an EQ like a full chain, it's not going to be crazy expensive if you do that for a weekend. But if you can get your EP or your 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 songs, whatever, the vocals for that recorded on a couple days, that is going to be transformative for the entire record. It's going to be a night and day difference in source quality. You can actually make bold decisions by committing some of the compression, by committing some of the natural saturation of the preamp, by EQing things the way you want. And you can do it in a very high quality way on the way in. And you can do that without owning that gear. You can just rent it in most places, right? So there's in most countries that I've been to, there is some sort of way of getting that stuff delivered to you and then sending it back. So don't let ownership stop you. Be resourceful, rent stuff, batch things. So maybe you don't need to be constantly recording all year. Maybe you can batch a certain important project and record all the vocals for your record in 1 or 2 weeks. Rent stuff for a couple of days or a week or two. And then the rest of the year you focus on writing. And then, of course, editing and mixing your songs and all that. So there's always a way. Don't let you not owning the gear, don't let that stop you. And now some more benefits of doing all of that and of committing, like things, for example, like the compression, the EQ, any of the bold things, committing anything really, right? Again, why is that beneficial? It forces you to decide what you want, which is great because at some point you got to make that decision anyways. You're not going to get away without deciding, right? You have to make the decision now or later. And doing it now just gets that thing out of the way, one less thing to worry about. And it will not only just will that decision be out of the way, you will be immediately forced to make the next decision because, like, let's say you start with the drums and you give them a certain vibe. Now you get to think about, okay, now if the drums sound like that, what do the guitars have to sound like to match that or to add to that vibe, to get closer to what I have in my mind? And now it will be easier to make a decision for guitars, or you're basically forced to make a decision because now you have those vibey drums. You want to add a guitar tone that like fits. And then once you have that, now you're like, okay, I know where my kick drum is sitting. I don't make that decision later in the mix. I already decided where the low end's going to be. So how does my bass now fit in between the kick and the bottom end of my guitars, for example? Now it's easier for you to make a bass tone decision because you already know where the drums live, where the kick drum is, where the bottom end of the guitar is, where there's a pocket for your low end of the bass. And now you can make that decision at the source and not just in the mix. if you have done a great pre-production, which I hope you did, and you always should, if you have a demo and scratch tracks of everything before you actually record, now you can pull in like a vocal scratch track and think about, okay, where do my vocals sit? Like, what's the range that I'm singing in? And do I have to create a pocket there in the guitar so that the vocals can cut through without having to be super loud? And then you can carve out some mid-range in the guitar to make space for the vocal. You can make all these intentional context decisions rather than recording everything flat and then wondering when you start the mix why nothing is really audible and everything is masking everything and there's no clarity and you got to clean everything up and there's all this mud. If you record intentionally and you build the puzzle as you're producing, you don't run into these issues in the mix as much. So it forces you to decide what you want and go for that. And it forces you to think about those things because you got to think about them anyways at some point. But it's easier to do it one step at a time intentionally than to have this pile of flat, full spectrum things in front of you that you have to make sense of when you try to mix. It helps you avoid the option paralysis in mixing. Again, with these flat tracks, now you have them in your session. Now you have 1,500 plugins to choose from and different approaches and different directions. And you could turn these recordings into basically anything. So what do you do and how do you decide? You're ultimately just going to give up at some point and choose something because the amount of options is just overwhelming. And if you make, intentional creative decisions with your limited gear at the source, you'll have less options in the mix because it's already pretty clear where things are going. And then you can do the obvious thing that the tracks ask for. You can react to the music instead of having to come up with something from scratch. Of course, it makes the record more exciting and unique. Like I said, like doing all these things at the source will just make things sound more like you, and it's less comparable. It's more memorable. It's going to be unique. It's more exciting. You can add ear candy stuff when people listen to the record, that they can discover on the third, fourth listen, not necessarily the first one. I love records where I listen to them 10 times, and every single time I discover something new, some detail, some little quirky thing. It's just interesting and awesome. You'll learn faster by making mistakes and experimenting. That's also one thing, right? If you commit and just make bold decisions, you'll make mistakes. It's inevitable. But that's good because then you've learned something and you won't make that mistake again. And the faster you make mistakes, the faster you'll learn. It's part of the process. So the more songs you finish, the faster you finish them, the more mistakes you make along the way, the faster you get better. If you compare two people, one person is recording 10 songs a year and the other person is recording one song a year. Even if they spend the same amount of time on all of that, the person with the 10 songs will be better, will have more skills, will have learned more than the person just working on one song trying to make it perfect. So move fast, make mistakes, move on, learn from it, do it over and over again, finish more music faster. That doesn't mean you should rush things or half-ass it, but you're going to make mistakes anyways. It's just part of the learning. So make them fast. You're going to make them anyways, so might as well make them now, learn from them, and move on. So yeah, move fast, break shit, that kind of mantra. And then, after all, if you do this and you embrace this kind of workflow and mindset and mentality, it gives your music a story beyond the one in the lyrics. If you want to eventually probably promote your music and create content around it and connect with your audience in ways outside of just the music. At least that's many artists want to do that. And so we ran vocals through a karaoke mic in a bathroom is memorable. You have something to say about the recording process. You have something to share that's exciting that you can turn into additional content. You have a story around the production. Just saying, well, I plugged my guitar into the DI input of my interface, and then I chose a preset of this amp sim. That's not a story, But a couple of things that I've done when I was full on producing bands all the time. I had a rock and roll band here in my studio, and they were one of the rare rock and roll bands who actually live the stuff that they sing about in their lyrics. So they've been through some shit, and they are really authentic in what they do. And so what we've done on that record, for example, there was this one part that's where they said to me, this part is supposed to sound disgusting. It's like the feeling, the hungover feeling after a really long night, of getting wasted, or the feeling when it suddenly flips from having a good time to, oh, now it's getting really terrible, and I like that's the end of the day, like that kind of terrible, sickening sort of feeling after partying or at the end of the party when you just overdid it. They wanted to capture that kind of feel in a part. And so we tried a bunch of things, and what we ended up doing is we played the part on the guitar. Instead of playing it the usual way, we used a bottleneck first to play it, so that made it sound a little out of tune, a little weird in and of itself. It was a normal riff, but he played it. We tuned the guitar so he could do the power chords with just putting the finger on it, and then he used the bottleneck, and he just moved through the chords like that. Then we reversed that part, like we played it backwards, the chord progression, then we reversed it, which made it sound even weirder. And then we sent it out through an output of the interface and into, like we reamped it, like we sent it into his guitar amp that was set up in the tracking room. And instead of just putting a mic in front of the guitar amp like we usually would for the rest of the record, we put the mic into a plastic bag and then dumped it into a glass of beer. And of course, we actually used beer, not just water, just because it was more fun and we could take pictures of it. So we put a glass of beer there. We put the mic in a plastic bag, dumped it in the glass of beer, and put that in front of the mic, in front of the amp. So we played a part backwards with a bottleneck, ran it out, reversed it so it plays normal, ran it out through the amp, recorded it through a mic that was inside of a glass of beer, like underwater. And because that didn't give us the desired underwater effect as much as we wanted, we also put a straw in there. And then the guitar player, while I was reamping, was blowing air, making bubbles in the beer while the part was blasting out of the speaker. And then we had this very weird, sickening sounding kind of underwater part, and also the story that we tracked it through actual beer. So that was an extreme example of doing stuff like that. And I have a picture of that. I'll put it in the show notes here. And maybe Manel can put it in the video so you can see that picture of the glass of beer. But yeah, it's like that was an extreme example, but there's a story there that you can tell afterwards, and it makes the entire recording experience memorable and fun, and it makes you want to do it again and experiment with more stuff. If you know who Sylvia Massey is, look her up. She does stuff like that all the time. She's famous for recording guitars through pickles. Like she would plug a cable, wires into a pickle on both ends, and then she would run the output of an amp through the pickle until the pickle explodes, and stuff like that. Crazy things. She would go to castles or power plant, like nuclear power plants and whatever, to record stuff. She has a book on that. It's called Recording Unhinged. Amazing read. And you don't have to go crazy all the time. That's not what I'm saying. But every once in a while, doing something wild or just making tiny little bold decisions here and there will give you that extra little touch to your record. And almost every producer I know does that. And even the ones known for very polished, clear, pristine sounding recordings, even they make bold decisions. Even the ones who record classical or jazz music where you do none of those things, they make bold decisions by committing the sound as they record. They will be super intentional about where they put the mic, which mic they choose, whether or not they EQ or compress it, which room they choose, because in those genres, the recording is the mix. There is little to no post-production, so you got to be super intentional with the recording. So even those audiophile, super hi-fi kind of productions, people have to be very bold. Nobody records flat and safe tracks. They just do whatever is right away. They don't save those decisions for later. And then there's the spectrum from those recordings all the way to the crazy Sylvia Massey stuff. Then one important thing that needs to happen is this mindset shift where you got to learn to think like a producer. You don't just capture performances. You're not just an engineer turning knobs and a musician playing. You create art, and a producer is like the creative director, like a movie director. You got to have a vision and then do whatever it takes to make it happen. So you're not just capturing performances. You're creating a piece of art. You're not just doing technical things and avoiding hum and clipping and hiss and all that stuff. You're creating art. There are little to no rules around that, right? And you got to think like a producer, not just an engineer. There's a difference. You got to ask yourself, what will make this track stand out? Because if you're just using a chord progression and a melody and you play it with a guitar, a bass, and then a drum rhythm below it, somebody has probably done that. Like, it's all been done. So how can you make your track stand out? How can you make this sound like you? What can you do so that people, when they hear it, they're like, oh yeah, that's that artist. That unique thing about you. Like, what is it that makes you special? Every artist has something special about them. So what is it? What can you do to make your records sound like you and memorable? Maybe it's the way you play. Maybe you don't have to do much crazy stuff because just the way you play is unique in and of itself. And then you just have to find a way to capture that and really feature what's cool about it. At the end of the day, stop chasing perfection and start chasing vibe. There's no such thing as a perfect record. It's perfect when it serves the song perfectly and the message and what you want to get across. So before we wrap this up, there's a couple of action steps that I have for you, a couple of little challenges and ways to kind of learn to do that and to get comfortable with that kind of approach. So I'd say pick one track this week, one song, and deliberately make one bold recording choice. Do the rest as you always do, but make one bold recording choice. You might program the drums the way you've done it. You might choose the same presets on the guitar amp sim. You might plug everything in DI, whatever. But make one bold recording choice, whatever it is. Record one guitar layer with a pedal in front of it. Record one vocal in a weird spot. Whatever you want to do. One bold choice. Record one thing without a clean DI. Just commit whatever you have in your chain. One bold choice, whatever it is, this week. Then document that. Reflect on whether it added vibe or not. Like maybe it was a fun experiment, but it didn't really work. So document what you've done. Listen to the result and then reflect on whether or not it added vibe. And then if it did, you have it documented. So when the situation again comes up where you want to do something like that and you need a similar vibe, you can go to your documents, to your notebook or wherever you store these, and see what you've done in the past to accomplish a certain vibe. And then you can do those things over and over again, maybe in a slightly different way, but you'll build your own library of unique tricks that are yours, that you can use on your production, that will ultimately become a common thread, like something that makes you stand out. Like if you've heard of, like most producers have their thing, right? There's always this one technique that one producer is famous for. It's their thing, kind of. You want to develop that for yourself too. And the way to do it is just pick the next track, make one bold decision, listen back, make a decision if it helped or not, if it was cool or not, what did it accomplish? Write it down somewhere, and then in the future, when you want to do a similar thing, you can look at what you've done in the past and do a similar thing again. So that's one thing. Start with one track this week, deliberately make one bold decision. On the next project, commit to at least one sound you cannot undo. That's the other thing. So one bold decision, and then on the next one, do at least one sound you can't undo. Like I said, remove the DI box. Just record the amp. It is what it is. You can't reamp. Or record through a recording chain, committing compression and EQ, and that's it. Or record something, run it out through the output, reamp it through some weird room or funny piece of equipment, and delete the original take. Just one thing you cannot undo, just to get comfortable, even if it's a mistake, even if it ends up being bad for the record, whatever, like it doesn't matter because you can always record a new thing. It's just to get comfortable with committing and using imperfect tracks and overcoming the fear of doing that, overcoming the feeling that you always have to have all the options and save everything. It's just like get used to committing stuff and making bold decisions. So that is those are my action steps for you to get comfortable with this whole concept. And if you just do one thing per project, like one bold decision and one thing you cannot undo, and then you document those things and you come back to them if you need them again, and then if you're comfortable with it, you can make two bold decisions or whatever. But that is the way to go. And even just making it a habit to try one new thing on each song you record, even that will go a long way. I know a couple of producers who actually do that, where and I think Ulf Blomberg, who we had on the podcast too, amazing metal producer from Sweden. He talked about that too, and I do that too, by the way, with every mix as well. It's like on every project, I'll pick one thing that I haven't done before, a plugin I've never used, a microphone I've never used, a recording technique I've never tried, something crazy maybe, and I'll just do that on every recording. And sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes it does. If it did, I learned something new. I have a new thing in my tool, in my bag of tricks, sort of. Yeah, if you only do that, that will get you a long way and will get you closer to making unique, exciting sounding records. And you will learn a lot as you do that. And always remember, you can't break things. It's just art. No one's gonna die. It's like, just do it. Just overcome the fear of making a mistake, because what happens if you make a mistake? You got to do it again. So what? Like, just do it. There's very little risk and a lot of opportunity. So yeah, I hope this was encouraging. I hope this is helpful and inspires you and makes you want to try things. Again, the core message here is safe typically equals boring. Bold typically equals exciting. That's basically it. I mean, your home recordings can sound world-class, even if you have limited gear, if you stop hiding behind safety and you start committing. Because then all the flaws turn into intentional decisions, and everything you've been trying to hide, you can now boldly put front and center, and no one's going to question it. And you can turn whatever disadvantage you have into your thing, and you can completely flip your mindset and your perspective on all of those things. So stop hiding behind safety, start committing, make the most of your equipment, discover your own way of producing records, your own thing. Safe equals boring, bold equals exciting. You can still do a bunch of things to not make mistakes all the time, of course, but just adding a couple of bold decisions to every production will go a long way. So yeah, final thing here, if you have ever made any of these like crazy experiments, some bold decision that turned out amazing, something that completely bombed and like was a total failure or whatever, like any exciting stories like that, any experiments, please share them with us. Send me an email at podcast@theselfrecordingband.com. Comment below if you're watching on YouTube. Send me a DM on Instagram, The Self-Recording Band or Benedictine. Post in our Facebook community, wherever. Just share your experiments with us and the results that you had. Or maybe share a story where you were just too afraid to do it and you regret it, or like whatever story you have around this topic. I would love to hear it. And I would most of all love to hear weird and exciting things that people tried, But anything really, share it with us. It's always helpful, always cool. We're going to share it on the podcast. If we get messages like that, we're going to do a shout out. We mention you and your band. So yeah, do that. Recommend this to your friends and let them share their stories as well. Whoever you think might benefit from this, please share it. That's the way this podcast can help more people like you. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.